Hello, Tri-Cities, and welcome to the 2020 Candidate Forum, the only region-wide business-focused candidate forum in the Tri-Cities, brought to you by the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce. And in this forum today, you'll be hearing from candidates running for the United States House of Representatives for Washington's 4th Congressional District. I'm Carissa Lacko, news anchor with KVUE today, and I'm pleased to be with you. Of course, the election not far away. Ballots will start going out October 13th. And then election day is on November 3rd. So a lot to get through in that time. So thank you for tuning in today. Right now, we're going to take a message from the president and CEO of the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce, Lori Matson.
As the foremost advocate and voice for business, the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce leads by advancing policies and positions that strengthen, preserve, and promote a thriving business climate, economy, and quality of life. The 2020 candidate forums are designed to highlight how candidate positions integrate with local business priorities. I'd like to take a brief moment to thank the Chamber's Board of Directors and Local Government Affairs Committee for their leadership in supporting our advocacy efforts. I'm especially pleased and grateful for the support of the candidate forum sponsors, Cascade Natural Gas, GISA Credit Union, JLH Group, and Hayden Homes. And last but not least, a very special thanks to our local news partners for collaborating on this project. Your time, talent, and expertise are valued and truly appreciated.
All right, thank you so much, Lori. It is a pleasure to serve the community in this way by helping inform our voters of the issues going on that will affect them. So we're going to talk about the format right now for today's forum. Each candidate will have 1 minute for opening and closing statements. Each candidate will be asked the same question, and the response time for each question is limited to 2 minutes. Time limit reminders will appear on screen at 10 seconds remaining, and if necessary, when the time is up. And since this is a forum, candidates will not be provided rebuttal time. So we are now ready to get started. Let's start by introducing today's candidates for the United States House of Representatives for the 4th Congressional District of Washington, Congressman Dan Newhouse and challenger Doug McKinley. Thank you so much for being here to both of you. So let's get started. We're going to start with opening statements in alphabetical order and then go to the questions. So Mr. McKinley, we'll start with your opening statement and you have 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Carissa. I'm running for Congress because I've watched for 40 years the stagnation of wages and salaries in this country and the concentration of wealth to the highest, to a tiny percentage of billionaires. And that's really harmed us. It's harmed our economic growth. It's harmed our quality of life. And the forces that made that happen are rooted in policy in Washington, D.C. We really need to change those policies if we're going to change those results. You're not simply going to have the market correct the imbalance of power between employers and employees. You're not going to have wages magically rise when all of the power is concentrated in the hands of a tiny minority. So we really are dependent upon the political process, I think, to even out the playing field and make America have a rising and broadening middle class again. So that's really my motivation in running for Congress.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. McKinley. Congressman Newhouse, you now have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Carissa, and thank you to the Tri-Cities Regional Chamber for sponsoring this forum. It's very important to be able to be in front of the people that will make the decision in this election. And let me just say, this is probably one of the most important elections of many of our lifetimes. Just so many critical issues have to be decided in the upcoming very near future because of the situation that we find ourselves in this country. And I think I bring to the table some of the unique qualities that will allow me to truly make those decisions with the best of all of the people that are in the 4th District, my constituents at heart. I was born and raised in the Yakima Valley. The Central Washington has been my home most my whole life. I've had a business here, raised my family here. The issues that we face in Central Washington, as well as the country, they're my issues. These are things that I live every day. And so I think that I truly do bring to the table some of the best qualifications to continue serving the 4th District in the best way I possibly can. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Congressman Newhouse. We're going to move into the question portion now, and a coin toss ahead of time is having Congressman Newhouse deciding that you will go first to answer the first question. So the first question is, what changes need to be made to current tax policy that will encourage investment in businesses and strengthen the economy?
Is that to me, Carissa?
Correct, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Well, thank you very much. A critical question. So just a few short months ago, our country had our economy was on fire. We were seeing a strong growth in business in most every sector, the lowest unemployment figures for many parts of our population, just a strong economy, largely because of some of the things that we've done just in the last few years. In 2017, we passed some very important tax reform policies that truly gave a tax cut across the board to working families as well as businesses that help create jobs and allow people to keep more of their hard-earned money. We did some things to make it more attractive for U.S. companies to come back to our shores, bring investment back into the United States, again, to help create jobs and produce so many different things that are necessary to make sure our country remains strong on into the future. And now with the COVID, the crisis that we're all facing, we've got to get back to that. We've got to have tax policies in place that will help us return to that strong economy that we have. We've done several things. The CARES Act we passed in order to help businesses, to help employees, to help workers, really provide them a bridge across this gulf that we're in until we get to the other side of this pandemic. We need to continue doing those things to make sure that our businesses and our workers are in place so that our economy can respond and recover just as quickly as possible. You know, this is a tough time. This is a time when we all have to come together as hard as we can, as well as we can, to rebound our economy and do that while at the same time keeping everyone as healthy as possible too. That truly is the highest priority. But I think we can do both. And I'll going to continue working hard to make sure that we do.
All right, Mr. McKinley, I'll repeat the question for you one more time. What changes need to be made to current tax policy that will encourage investments in businesses and strengthen the economy?
I think Congressman Newhouse's answer really gave away the game. He's correct. We did have historically low unemployment before the COVID-19 crisis hit. But despite the fact that we had historically low unemployment, it wasn't doing anything to raise wages. We were still on the same trajectory of all of the productivity growth in the economy the benefits of that going to this tiny cohort of multimillionaires. It's true, we had millions and millions of Americans working, but it's also true that we had tens of millions of them working in jobs that provided marginal benefits, that didn't provide enough pay to support their families, that left them one medical bill or broken down car away from homelessness. And the fact that Congressman Newhouse won't acknowledge that reality in the economy and instead just cheerleads about the 2017 tax cut is really disappointing, because if you think about it, Mr. Newhouse's business provides a perfect example of what's wrong with the economy. He has a multi-million-dollar agriculture business that depends on low-wage workers, many of whom, it's my understanding, many of whom are undocumented. And that model works great for him. He makes millions of dollars with it. But the people who work in agriculture up and down Central Washington are living in poverty. That's just the reality of it. Our congressional district in Central Washington has the lowest family income in the state. And, to hear Mr. Newhouse talk about it, his solution is to give rich guys another tax cut like they did in 2017, because that tax cut that was voted on was not across the board. It skewed the benefits very heavily up the income scale. And that's just a fact. You can talk to the Congressional Budget Office about that. You can, any independent study agrees with that premise. So the first step to solving our problems is to recognize that they exist. And I wish our congressman would do that.
All right, we're going to move on to the second question. Mr. McKinley, you'll answer this one first. What, if any, significant reforms need to be made to fix the U.S. immigration system, and what will you do to make it happen?
Well, here's a spot where Congressman Newhouse has been very active. There's a bill, and I forget the name of it, that Mr. Newhouse has voted with, I think, 36 of his Republican colleagues and a majority of Democrats that would give legal status to tens of thousands of workers in the 4th Congressional District who are here and are undocumented. And I think that's a step in the right direction. I don't agree with everything in the bill. I think the bill almost sets up an indentured servitude for the people who would take advantage of the status of allowing them to stay in the country. I think, it requires them to spend 10 years working in agriculture or something along those lines. I'm not familiar with all the details with it, but I do commend Mr. Newhouse for stepping across the aisle and partnering with his Democratic colleagues in the House of Representatives to provide some form of immigration reform. I think it's necessary. I think, there, like I say, tens of thousands of people in central Washington who are undocumented, and many times they have children who are U.S. citizens. When you tear those families apart, when you deport those parents and leave those kids, they're not going back to Mexico. They're staying right here in the United States. And if you tear those families apart, it's counterproductive. You really can't expect the children of these undocumented workers to thrive and survive in the United States if we're sending their parents back to Mexico. So, I support comprehensive immigration reform. I think that the main difference between Congressman Newhouse and myself is that I would go a step further than the bill he supported in the House with the support of Democrats. I would look for a bill that allowed individuals not only the freedom to stay in the United States, but also the freedom to find work where they could find it and not be tied to a single employer.
All right, Congressman Newhouse, what, if any, significant reforms need to be made to fix the U.S. immigration system, and what will you do to make it happen?
So one of my biggest priorities since being elected to Congress is fixing our broken agricultural labor situation. And that certainly gets into the immigration issues in a big way. We have a huge problem in this country. As Mr. McKinley has alluded to, we have a multi-billion-dollar agricultural industry. And unfortunately, a large number of our employees that we depend on are document challenged. They're not here legally. My goal and my priority is to help fix that. That's just crazy for our businesses. It's crazy for the people we depend on, our essential workers, our agricultural workers that we depend on to feed Americans and people around the world. So I've worked very hard on a bipartisan basis, and I'm thankful that that's recognized, to pass meaningful immigration reform as it relates to agricultural labor. We're close. We got a bill through the House, the first time in almost 35 years that a bill of that significance we were able to pass. Now it's in the Senate waiting for action. But this will continue to be one of my biggest priorities. We needed it not only in the agricultural industry, but across the board in so many different parts of the economy in the United States. And so I'll continue working on that. Other things that are also important. We have a huge part of our population that fall into the category of DACA. Those young people that were brought to this country through no fault of their own, but are not here legally. We've got to do something to be able to provide them certainty in their lives. And so, again, I've been working on a bipartisan basis to provide that lasting solution for them. And then on top of all that, I think every American can agree that we need to know who's coming across our border. We have to have border security. And so I will continue working to make sure that that's the case as well.
All right, Congressman Newhouse, you'll answer the next question first. So a little bit of a long one. Through annual deficits and government overspending, the national debt continues to climb at an unsustainable rate. How does COVID impact the debt crisis? And in turn, how does the debt crisis impact the economy? And what steps will you take to deal with this critical problem?
Well, that's a key question that we face in this country right now, Carissa, and I think everybody recognizes that we had a debt crisis before COVID. I've been a sponsor of a balanced budget amendment since my first day in Congress, trying to call attention to this looming crisis in our country. We cannot continue to spend more money than we take in. There's got to be some changes, structural changes. Now, in 2020, the COVID crisis hits us, and it has hit every part of our economy, every community, every part of our culture, way more than we anticipated. I felt it was important for us to make investments to make sure that our economy, as much as we possibly can, doesn't go down the tubes, that we save as many businesses and employees from the economic disaster that's out there. And so the investment we made in the CARES Act of almost $3.5 trillion, even though that runs up the tab of our credit, I think it was an important investment to avert some of those terrible problems that could happen. And we've got to do more. We've got to continue to do more. However, we also have to keep in mind this growing debt, that if we don't get a handle on that, that's also a crisis that will bring our country to its knees. So I'll continue to work on a bipartisan basis. I'm part of a group that has brought many ideas together and presented to leadership on how we should do this, how we can curb our spending and get it more in line with the tax revenues that we have. It's not going to be a short solution. It's going to take time to turn this economic ship around, but we've got to start today. And as we move through this crisis of the pandemic, we have to keep in mind the debt. We always have to keep that in the back of our mind, because it is also a crisis that we need to avert.
All right, Mr. McKinley, I'll respond for you. Through annual deficits and government overspending, the national debt continues to climb at an unsustainable rate. How does COVID impact the debt crisis? And in turn, how does the debt crisis impact the economy? And what steps will you take to deal with this critical problem?
Well, the premise of the question is false. There is no debt crisis. There is a large amount of debt, and when properly managed, the federal government should have no problem making payments on that debt. What you don't want to do is lock yourself into an inflexible situation where you don't have the ability to do that. And that's what Congressman Newhouse is unfortunately advocating when he advocates a balanced budget amendment. The fact of the matter is there are times you want to run deficits and there are times you want to run surpluses. When the economy is on the rocks, when you're in a recession or a depression, that's when you want to put money into the economy. That's what we learned in the Great Depression. That's what we learned coming out of the financial crisis in 2008. And that's what we're accomplishing right now, frankly, by the CARES Act and the trillions of dollars that we spend. What we don't want to do is take a situation like Congressman Newhouse took in 2017, where you had an economy that was chugging along just fine, and throw it into massive spend or massive deficits. If you'll remember, for the last 6 years of President Obama's term, every year the deficit was shrunk year after year after year. And that had continued into the first term of President Trump. Then what happened? They voted in their big tax cut, and guess what happened? Then the annual deficit rose to $1 trillion again. So they did the opposite of what a responsible government would do. They spent big when times were good. They created huge deficits where times were good. And that's not how you manage the economy. What you want to do is save money when times are good, so that when a COVID crisis hits, when a financial catastrophe hits, when there's a war, there's all kinds of bumps in the road, and you want to make sure that you have money available when those arise, and you can do your deficit spending at that time.
All right, that brings us to our final question today. And Mr. McKinley, you'll go first for this one. This has been a year like no other. Our state has been struggling with the coronavirus, economic downturn, severe unemployment, civil unrest, and catastrophic wildfires. What do you think is the greatest challenge the 4th Congressional District will face in the next couple of years, and how do you plan to address that challenge?
Well, as I said in the introduction, the main problem we have in this country is that all of the productivity gains are going to the wealthiest people in the country. And what that does, since we're a consumer-driven economy, 70% of our economy is driven by consumers, 70% of our economy, excuse me. What that does is it slows down our growth rate. If you can allow the economy to grow, you can grow your way out of virtually all these problems. You can grow your way out of the deficit problem. You can grow your way out of the debt problem. And you can, more fundamentally, you can provide a higher quality of life for our citizens. Wildfires are all obviously a problem. We need better forest management. We also need to take global warming seriously. COVID is obviously a massive problem. I'm optimistic that over the next 12 months we'll have I forget the word, a shot that you can take so that you don't get it, so that you're immune. And I'm certain that we will develop, and as we learn more about the disease and understand it better, we'll develop ways to open more and more of our economy and our schools and get kids back into the classroom and get people back into our small businesses, even if COVID is still around. So, those problems I think are the short-term problems. The ones that I'm more concerned about are the problems that have been going on for decade after decade after decade, where tens of millions of Americans are living hand to mouth, and all of the wealth that they create working for major American corporations is basically put in the pockets of a handful of uber wealthy people. That is hurting us in so many ways. There's so many social pathologies that can be related to people struggling over their finances, whether you're talking about drug abuse, divorce, all the things that conservatives, want to root out of the economy can be helped by a more equitable wealth distribution. So I think that really is the biggest challenge we have over the next couple of years.
All right, Congressman Newhouse, I'll repeat the question for you. This has been a year like no other. Our state has been struggling with the coronavirus, economic downturn, severe unemployment, civil unrest, and catastrophic wildfires. What do you think is the greatest challenge the 4th Congressional District will face in the next couple of years, and how do you plan to address that challenge?
So excellent question, Carissa. And I gotta say that there are so many things that are priorities for Central Washington. For the 4th Congressional District. Certainly, we've got to continue the strong work on our Hanford cleanup. That legal and moral obligation of the federal government has to be a continuing thing. We've got to be able to expand our ability to produce clean, renewable electricity, and I think that includes both the great things that are happening in the nuclear field, as well as supporting the hydropower in our Columbia and Snake River dams. We've got to continue supporting all the great work out at that jewel of the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, which we're also proud of. The forest fire management issues, all of those things, the agriculture, the ag labor. But I really think that on top of everybody's mind right now, and something that is more severe and more serious than we ever thought would be possible back in March or February or March, is rebounding from this crisis that has been brought on by COVID-19. We have witnessed, I think, lasting damage to our economy, truly serious impacts to people's health. It's going to change so many things in our way of life, our everyday living. That I don't think we even fully appreciate the changes that probably we're going to have to undergo. Rebounding from this, getting our economic engines back up and running as strong as they possibly can, recovering the jobs that have been lost, those businesses that are suffering. We've seen too many of them closing. I think that has got to be a priority moving forward in the next couple of years. And I'll work as hard as I can to bring prosperity back into the 4th Congressional District and our country.
All right, this ends the question and answer portion of the forum. So we'll move into closing statements. And since Mr. McKinley opened, Congressman Newhouse, you'll start with your closing statement and you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Carissa. And again, thank you very much to the Tri-Cities Regional Chamber for providing this forum. It's so critical and so important that voters are informed in this election year that is probably one of the most important of our lifetime. I just want to remind people of some of the hard work that I've done on your behalf. I started out, for instance, the 116th Congress just almost 2 years ago, attending a bill signing for the Yakima Basin Enhancement Project, a critical bill for the future of water in the Yakima Basin, something that will help continue to build on our strong economic foundation. And then just last week, I'm very proud to say that we passed off the House floor the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Act, several bills that are pertaining to that really important issue that will do so much to help solve that issue on American tribal reservations and beyond. So I want to continue working hard for the people of 4th District, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak with people today.
All right, Mr. McKinley, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the sponsors of this event. I think what we've seen here today is that my observations about our congressman are correct. He does not acknowledge that there's a problem when tens of thousands of his constituents are working full time and barely getting by. He simply doesn't see that as an issue that needs to be addressed through federal legislation. And I think that's the biggest difference between Congressman Newhouse and myself. My focus is on working families. My focus is on ordinary people who work ordinary jobs and need to feed their families and pay their bills with those jobs. And those people are paying too much for health care. They're not getting quality raises year in and year out. They're paying too much for higher education, and they're feeling the squeeze. And what we need is a Congress that's attentive to that. We need a Congress that recognizes that slows our economy. It creates problems in our community. And we need a congressman and a Congress who are committed to fixing those problems. And that's what I'm running on. That's what you get with me. You'll get a guy who's focused 100% on fixing the problems of everyday working people.
All right. Well, thank you to Congressman Newhouse, Mr. McKinley, for joining us today for the Tri-City Regional Chamber's 2020 Candidate Forum. We really appreciate you taking the time. And of course, everyone, as we begin the election or the countdown to the election on November 3rd, really not that far away, we encourage you to get out and vote when the time comes and do your research ahead of time. You can watch this video and other candidate forums that the Chamber has done on their website if you'd like at tricityregionalchamber.com. And before we let you go, we'd like to thank our sponsors as well. Of course, thank you to the Chamber. Thank you to KView and Cascade Natural Gas, Gisa Credit Union, the JLH Group, and Hayden Homes. And of course, thank you to all of you for watching this as well and staying informed. I'm Carissa Lemkel for KView Local News, reminding you to get out and vote.